Hey everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Alex. I'm a member of the Communist Party and also on the board for the Peace and Justice Center. Today, if you don't know already, we're going to be doing an educational on the history of International Workers' Day in the United States, otherwise known as May Day. Our presenter today is a friend of the party, Mike Paradela. Mike is a local historian who's been helping our comrades in San Jose learn its radical history and culture and to bring forward lessons of the past and how they inform our analysis in the modern day in San Jose. If you've seen our On This Day posts, that's all Mike's work with us. Mike is also on the board for the Peace and Justice Center. Um, and yeah, let's turn it over to you, Mike. Take it away.
Well, yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say again, my name is Mike Paradela, and as Alex said, I'm a member of the Peace and Justice Center, and I'm really excited to give you this presentation. I think originally I was going to have people respond to create a Google link for people to ask questions, but I think it might be easier if it's just the chat because it's just hectic on my end. All right. Can everyone should be able to see? Hold on, I don't want you to see my entire screen. My bad. Everyone should be able to see this, correct? If I do this? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so if you have any questions or comments and stuff, please put it in the chat and Alex will kind of let me know. All right. Yeah, so today we're gonna go over May Day and look at this is a very brief introduction to a workers' holiday that is celebrated all around the globe. So here's how this is going to work. We're gonna have an introduction. I'll introduce myself and go over the history of it. And we'll talk about like why does it matter, and then at the end we'll have like 15 to 20 minutes to kind of like discuss and kind of like internalize and digest what we talked about. Okay. So who am I? So my name is Mike Paradella, as mentioned before. I have a master's in modern European history with an emphasis on French imperialism. And ever since I graduated from San Jose State in about 2016, I've been slowly developing an affinity for American history, especially as I've been organizing here in San Jose. I am also a history teacher at a private school in Los Gatos called Fusion Academy, and I'm also a community organizer in San Jose since 2014. What really radicalized me was the slaying of Mike Brown, and upon his death, it made me realize there's just something wrong with this system. It can't be just like how every day our Black siblings and brothers and sisters are dying um, at unprecedented rates. So it made me really question not only like is another thing possible, like how do we make another world possible? And I've been through various different organizations from Socialist Alternative to like Buy-In to other varying organizations like Serve the People in San Jose. And now I'm on a member of the Peace and Justice Center. Okay. Uh, and then also I want to say, but my goal for this is to provide people with a comprehensive view of American history and see how May Day came to be. Because I'm a historian, my question I always asked is, well, why didn't May Day happen in 1886 and not say immediately with the colonization of the United States? Like, what was going on? What were the forces at play? Um, what were the obstacles that people were having? Because people can go on strike at any time, but why did they choose this? And so through my investigation and study, I kind of came up with this history. And I'm hoping that this history will give people a comprehensive view of kind of what's going on, but also give people the tools needed to understand what can we do forward. So we're going to look at a brief history, and we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the causes of Mayday and looking at things in the grand scheme of things because, at least from my perspective, a lot of the issues we face today can directly be tied back to when the labor movement first began all the way back in the 1700s. Okay, so we really need to figure out what's going on. Can someone from the audience read this quote for me?
I'll volunteer if
Okay.
no, Anand unmuted. Sorry, Anand.
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah. Okay. The year 1886 has witnessed a more profound and far more extended agitation among the members of organized labor than any previous year in the history of our country. The year 1886 will be forever remembered as one of the greatest importance in the battle between capital and labor in the United States. New York Bureau of Labor Statistics, 1887.
Yeah, so we can really see like May Day had a profound impact on the American government. And If they're like completely worried about the tension between labor and capital, we should really investigate what the hell happened, you know? So we're going to start off with the colonial period. So in the colonial period, there are a lot of different laboring and exploited classes in the United States. Chief among them are indentured servants, slaves, merchants, and artisans. And we'll see at this time, the ruling classes are actually the aristocracy and the monarchy. And this is going to be super important to understanding like why the labor movement happened or why people couldn't strike. So the first thing to note is in colonial America, uh, before the colonization even begins, I should mention, there is plenty of land in England to satisfy the will and needs of everyone over there. So, like, colonization was not necessary if you were an average working person in England. It was necessary for people who were part of the aristocracy because they wanted to satisfy, they have an insatiable need for land, hunger, and power. And this is one of the chief motivators behind the colonization of what's going to become the United States, primarily because they are interested in raiding Spanish ports to steal their wealth from them. And so what they do too is they recognize that if they go to the New World, the so-called New World, they are going to pretty much die within 7 years. So in order to do their engage in their colonial efforts, they actually kidnap Irish children and English workers and prison debtors and force them to live in what's going to become the United States. They do this because they know they're going to die, and it's just forced labor, essentially. And what they do with this is they create what is called an indentured servant. They create the headright system, which basically is the indentured servants. The indentured servants have a 7-year contract period where at the end of it they are given land and a little bit of wealth and stuff, so that as a quote reward for their journey. But the thing to note is this is a contractually binding relationship between the servant and the master. It is the only thing that is different between this and slavery at this time is the fact that it ends in 7 years. And as they are colonizing this new world, a so-called new world, they're also introducing another labor element, which is that of the African slave. African slavery slowly crept into this land through the Caribbean, thanks to this person named Christopher Columbus, who we all know is a not cool person in the like most PC way possible. Okay. So I'm gonna move on. And this is thing to note is that the indentured servants didn't like that they were basically slaves at this time. And so very frequently slaves and the indentured servants would rebel together. And this is where we get into 1676, which is a key component of the laboring conditions of the colonial period and helps explain why May Day could not have happened at this time. In 1676, there's this the ruling class introduces racism as a key component of the American working class. What happened was there's this thing called Bacon's Rebellion. To give some context to Bacon's Rebellion, Jamestown was the second colonial settlement that the English had and became incredibly prosperous. Um, through the headright system, they were getting more and more indentured servants and slowly populating the area and developing the land. And more importantly, once the contract expired, the newly freed indentured servants would have to encroach on native land. Um, and the natives did not like this, and so they started attacking the people encroaching on their land. And the newly freed servants are like, "Oh, hey, Jamestown, can you protect us from these attacks?" And due to class antagonism, the aristocracy said, "No, deal with it yourself." Um, this then comes along this person named Nathaniel Bacon. Nathaniel Bacon sees this as an opportunity for him to gain a lot of political power by meeting the needs of these indentured servants that are being attacked. So what he does is he starts to build an army to go attack the Native Americans. When Jamestown hears about this, they tell Nathaniel Bacon he cannot do that because if he attacks them, they're going to kill their source of profit and their wealth. And so what Nathaniel Bacon then does is he turns his army onto Jamestown. And once word gets out that Nathaniel Bacon is attacking Jamestown, we see African slaves, indentured servants who are both African and Irish and English, and the indentured servants themselves all band together to burn Jamestown to the ground, which at this time is the richest colony, and they do it. Even though Nathaniel Bacon is going to die within a couple days after they burn Jamestown to the ground, the message was sent pretty clearly to the rest of the colonial world. The poor and oppressed masses outnumber and can kill the rich minority at any moment. And so, in order to get around this, the aristocracies start to introduce racist legislation to divide the working classes of the indentured servants and the African slaves. The indentured servants now become the overseers of the slave plantations. And there was a concentration of indentured servant labor in the north and African slave labor in the south. And they pass codes after codes preventing black people and white people from interacting with each other. They make it so a skin color becomes the basis of basis of class. And this is gonna for even to this day, we are still feeling the effects of Bacon's rebellion. And at this time, there are almost no attempts to limit the working day because of the contractual obligation that indentured servants have with their masters. And so a key thing too is that in this contractual obligation, it is legal to kill your indentured servant if they aren't listening to you. And so we have, and on a practical level, if they go on strike or do other things, they will just die because they cannot survive. And so a lot of the resistance at this time comes in the form of running away, usually along with a slave, just engaging in general uprisings, or just simply killing the master. Those were the forms and ways that working people were able to resist. And then along comes the American Revolution. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but just to give the long story of it, essentially, the American Revolution was a war of it was this class struggle against the English aristocracy and the mercantile system. Uh, I'm still not sure if it was a revolution against feudalism or semi-feudalism, because the English Civil War was a liberal revolution, so I'm not sure about the details of that. But the thing to note is that the American Revolution started with the laboring classes under the leadership of the Sons of Liberty, and then the Continental Congress, which was the union of the slave owners and merchants, were able to seize power and bend the revolution to their will, which is why like we have the electoral college and all that stuff because they were able to maintain their hold. Okay. And we're yeah. All right. And so the thing to note is with this American Revolution, after the severance, the colonial relationship between the American colonies and England, there's almost an immediate liquidation of the indentured servitude class. And the indentured servitudes now all become wage earners within the scope of a year or two after this revolution. And even more importantly, the merchants and slave owning class now become the ruling classes of the United States and shape the government to their will. And how do they do this? They create suffrage only for people who own property. And by doing this, they are effectively removing the poor from the voting. And they know, and they even say if they allow the poor to vote, they're going to lose their wealth. And we can also see the effectiveness of the American Revolution because in 1789, when the United States becomes a nation after the Constitution is signed, we see within 2 years the first unions emerge. And the first thing these unions demand, especially in Philadelphia, is a 10-hour workday. And we don't know the outcome of this. We highly suspect that it failed. But what we do know is that in 1791, this is when the labor movement that we know and we are part of begins. Okay? So I'm gonna take a quick break and blow my nose, but can people type in the chat or just say like one or two things that they think is pretty interesting right now? Anything? Sorry, y'all, allergies are a pain. Okay, so now we're gonna move into the next period, which is the antebellum period. This is essentially where there are two main classes in the United States: the wage earning class, which are the mechanics, and the slaves. And the ruling classes at this time are the industrialists and the slave owners. Okay. And so we're going to really see how the wage earners become mechanics. Mechanics are what we are essentially what historians call us today. We're specialized workers, or we're industrial workers. That's another way of thinking about it. Okay. So now moving on. One of the biggest obstacles for the American working class is slavery. And almost immediately, it's the immigrants that recognize how insidious slavery is and how much it is hurting everyone's rights. American workers also start to realize this in 1829 when there are the first attempts at an 8-hour day. These 8-hour strikes almost never succeed because one, everyone else is working 16 hours a day, but on the other hand, two, slavery is actively working against them. And so people can strike for 10 hours and 12 hours and win, but whenever they do 8 hours, what happens is either it's not enforced or the factory closes and moves to the south. And this is also where Americans start to learn one of our strongest tools, which is now made illegal, the general strike. The general strike, our first general strike happens in 1835 when workers are protesting for a 10-hour day. One factory, and I believe Philadelphia, is saying, oh, hey, we want 10 hours. And then when it is not given, other workers go on strike in solidarity with one of the, I think it's a carpenters union. And slowly, more and more workers in Philadelphia are all going on strike in solidarity with each other, essentially shutting the entire city down. And this is considered huge because workers now realize if we just shut down a city, we can basically win our demands if everyone doesn't go into work. And this sends profound effects all throughout the 1830s and up until even the 1940s and 50s, when workers realize if we just shut shit down, we can win. And at this time, too, we start to see the labor movement move all the way into the West Coast, with San Francisco getting out their first union in 1852. I believe it was a cigar or a carpenters union that was the first ones in San Francisco. And this is hugely important because now the labor movement is on the East and West Coast. And one of the chief objectives of this movement is not only higher wages, but shorter working hours. Uh, Throughout the pre-Civil War period, the working day is from 16 hours, and workers are slowly moving it down to 10 hours through various strikes and legal means and general strikes, all that stuff. And it is at this time when workers realize slavery needs to go because they cannot win their rights, or we cannot win our rights if slavery is still around. And we can even see this in this quote. Can someone read this quote for me?
Yeah, the question of slavery is in truth a question of labor. Whenever the rights of labor are discussed or upon whatever department of reform, we insist that the influence of slavery is arrayed against us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the Voice of Industry. The Voice of Industry is one of the leading labor magazines, and they're saying this back in 1847, almost 20 years before the Civil War. Workers were realizing, hey, whenever we are winning our rights, the slave owners or the industrialists are working against us. And so the conclusion is slavery has to go. This is why during the Mayday coalitions, I'm very insistent upon it, because this is literally how we were being pit against each other. And we can see further too, at this time, workers are starting to realize we can do this, and the only way to secure our wins is through legislative power. In 1840, Martin Van Buren passes an executive order mandating that everyone in the government has to have a 10-hour day. And one of the reasons why he does this is because of the general strike from 1835. Had such profound effects that it scared the living shit out of the American government, that like if workers realize we can just shut the country down, we can win our demands. So Martin Van Buren is trying to get ahead of it by mandating an executive order to allow workers to have a shorter day. And when Martin Van Buren does this, workers realize that a shorter working day cannot happen at the factory level or the city level. It needs to happen at the legislative level, which is at the state or federal government. And as workers are trying to fight for this, there is the obstacle of slavery keeps emerging again and again. Famously, the government is shut down whenever workers try to talk about slavery at the federal level. It's known as the Gag Order of 1836. And it stays, they shut the government down for like 6 years whenever you bring in slavery, talk about slavery. And so this is when the Civil War happens. In 1861 to 65, essentially the Civil War is the slave owners versus the rest of society, namely the industrialists, the mechanics, the slaves, and all that stuff. And the Civil War um, is hugely important for our fight to have a 10-hour day because now this is our chance to finally liberate not only our African siblings, but also to fight for our rights. Okay. So what thoughts or comments do people have on this section that I just kind of talked about?
By the way, if you want to say something, just raise your hand or type something in chat.
Okay, I'm just gonna move on. So now we're gonna go to the
Actually, no, I was gonna ask something. Sorry about that, Mike.
Okay.
What sort of similarities do you see in today's anti-union?
Hold on to that question because I'm about to get into that. Okay. That's a
Perfect.
great question. Okay. So now we're gonna look into the post-Civil War period, and this is gonna be the modern labor movement that we all know and love today. And we're gonna see why did May Day come to be. So immediately after the Civil War, the slave owners and slaves are liquidated from society overnight, and the former slaves are now becoming mechanics. And this is where we see unions have to wrestle with the question of slavery, but of racism, but also in 1863, which is the year of the Emancipation Proclamation, almost 100 unions state nationally that they're going to take up the fight for an 8-hour day in that same year. Fincher's Review, which is another very popular labor magazine, recorded, I believe, 60 to 87 unions all announcing they're gonna fight for an 8-hour day. Particularly, they're like 4 or 5 from the South, which emerged immediately as well once slavery is liquidated. And so unions start to shift in realizing from the experience of the 1840s and 50s, this can't just be a struggle at the factory level. It needs to be a struggle at the national level. So unions start to organize themselves into national unions, which is the first one, which is the National Labor Union. The National Labor Union basically says all workers, regardless of gender, skin color, creed, are all welcome into our ranks as long as they agree to fight for higher wages, shorter working hours, and better working conditions. Even though the National Labor Union is going to quickly disintegrate, 2 other important unions emerge. The Knights of Labor, which is going to be the key one to ask for is going to be the one that leads to May Day, and then the AFL, which is going to emerge out of the ashes of the Knights of Labor. At this same time, another key thing that is happening in the American economy is imperialism and the development of the American empire, which is our current economy right now. You see the rise of corporations and monopolies start to dominate every aspect of society. Workers' rights are being attacked left and right. The working day is now being extended back into the 10 hours. And it is these conditions in which the modern labor movement is rising. And as I kind of mentioned, the Emancipation Proclamation had a huge effect. Various unions endorsed an 8-hour workday. And the key thing they note is they want an 8-hour workday without reduction in pay. And California decides to get in front of this in 1868 by passing an 8-hour law. But this law is quickly overturned by the California Supreme Court, which causes this little town of San Jose to create an 8-hour league to say, hey, we had an 8-hour law. We need to get it back. We need to fight for it without a reduction in wages. And then 3 years later, San Jose realizes this can't just be a fight at San Jose. This needs to be a fight at Santa Clara because Santa Clara is larger and there are more working people. And slowly, as you can see, workers are slowly realizing, hey, we need to start fighting for this even harder, even though, realizing that the government is working against them. And this is where we start to see the 8-hour law even further become part of the national focus. Particularly the Knights of Labor says, we cannot just win this at the factory level. We need to win it nationally. And they realize the best way to do this is the general strike, which is the strongest weapon of the working class at this time. And they mandate May 1st, 1886 to be the day in which they do it, because I believe in Illinois, that is when the 8-hour law is supposed to be implemented, but I think it's fallen through. So workers are prepared to go on strike. And it is a national strike. 400 to 500,000 workers go on strike at this time. And although this doesn't sound like a lot, we need to remember too, in this time period, most working people are living in the countryside. The cities are much smaller than they are today. So 400 to 500,000 people going on strike is huge. In Chicago, 90 to 100,000 people will just walk off the job. 10% of them are immigrants, and a majority of them are black and white people, all banding together to fight for this. It is so impressive that the AFL says May 1st should forever be remembered as the second Independence Day of American workers. And various workers from all over the country join in solidarity for this strike. And this leads into the Haymarket Affair. The Haymarket Affair is essentially a major incident on May 4th, but there was actually an incident of violence that leads up to it prior. So on May 3rd, 1886, there's some violence that breaks out at the McCormick Harvest Plant in Chicago. Workers were protesting scabs, or people who are working when they're not supposed to, specifically hired by the bosses. And when they're protesting and preventing the scabs from working, the police shoot into the crowd and disperses it. And then the next day, there's a meeting that is called under very suspicious circumstances, because normally when a meeting is called at this time, the organization would put their name so that way people know who it is. An ad is published with no name of the organization saying, oh, hey, meet at Haymarket Square, which is about a block or two away from the police station. And this is not a common spot that a lot of workers usually meet at. And so as they're working there, several anarchists like August Spies, Albert Parsons, and a bunch of others are denouncing capitalism, saying how workers are having their labor stolen by their bosses, and they're encouraging people to use dynamite and all these things to fight for their rights. We don't know what happened, but we do know is a bomb was thrown and it kills several officers. And immediately the police shoot in the crowd, killing more people. This is known as the Haymarket Affair. It is what receives international attention from the rest of the world, because they're seeing how the United States government is reacting to workers fighting for their rights. Of the 8 activists that are tried, 3 are let go and 5 are executed, and they are known as the Haymarket Martyrs. And this is when we start to see a backlash against labor unions. But before we get into that, we should remember too that as a result of May 1st, 200,000 workers receive a shorter working day. If it went from 14 hours, if they had a 14-hour day, they now had a 12-hour day. If they had a 10-hour day, they now had an 8-hour day. So this is one of the major concessions that was won immediately after May 1st, 1886. But due to the Haymarket Affair, labor unions are now repressed for the next 4 years, because it is seen that if you're part of a labor union, you're part of an anarchist, or you're a socialist or a communist that wants to overthrow the government. And so legislative policies are repressing labor unions heavily. But there's a thing that happens internationally. On May 1890, the Second International Conference of International Workers votes to have May Day be a day for all workers, because they are deeply inspired by the American struggle for our shorter working day. This is one of 2 holidays that are celebrated internationally from American workers. The other one is International Women's Day, which again is inspired by American women. almost immediately, the American government responds to this declaration of May Day by offering Labor Day, I think it's like September 3rd or the first Monday of September, as the alternative to May Day because they are very worried that American workers are gonna just start popping off. And the AFL endorses Labor Day as the alternative to May Day for various reasons. Can someone read this quote for me? Or just read one sentence, I'll read another sentence.
Sure, I can.
Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, sure, just read the whole thing?
Yeah.
Or- Okay. A great international demonstration shall be organized for a fixed date in such a manner that the workers in all countries and in all cities shall, on a specified day, simultaneously address to the public authorities a demand to fix the workday at 8 hours, and to put into effect the other resolutions of the International Congress of Paris. In view of the fact that such a demonstration has already been resolved upon by the American Federation of Labor at its convention of December 1888 in St. Louis for May 1st, 1890, that day is accepted as the day for the international demonstration. The workers of the various nations shall organize the demonstration in a manner suited to conditions in their country.
Yeah. So the bold part is my emphasis because this part was hugely contested in the Second International Conference of Socialists because a lot of people were saying, why are we fighting for an 8-hour workday if we already have it? They want to do something internationally, but they were saying that if we already have an 8-hour workday, workers here aren't going to want to celebrate or even fight on this day together. So the French and Germans proposed, what if we have workers focus on their own specific conditions on May 1st, but we all do it together? And this was the result of that. This is why the key thing they were worried about was workers interfering with politics in other countries. Or not understanding enough of the conditions to make a judgment collectively. And so the goal was just focus on what is immediately around you and win that way. And as a result of this, we can really see how May Day has evolved over time. When May Day comes back in full force, especially once World War I starts popping off, American workers from 1913 to 1914 are demanding that the US does not enter or participate at all in World War I. Because everyone's seeing how the imperialist alliances are forming and consolidating and are heading in a direction of war. Even in 1914 and again in 1916, American workers denounce America's participation in World War I through its invasion of Mexico and occupation of it. The American government was occupying Veracruz, and then when Pancho Villa attacks them for invading Mexico, the Americans again invade Mexico to look for Pancho Villa, also as an attempt to destabilize the Mexican government. And so American workers are like going on strike on this day and even doing educationals to denounce this. In 1917, once Wilson announces he's going to war, immediately he's saying we need to reinvade Mexico. So what workers do instead of actually going on strike, they hold mass meetings all over the country to educate people on what is happening. So that way in the next one in 1918, when they go on strike, even more people can come out. And then in 1918, as World War I is coming to its conclusion, workers are denouncing peace and also even further a demand to the cost of living adjustments from this war. And in 1919, as a result of the May Day on 1918, a lot of the leaders are arrested because of how much they were shutting the country down. And then in 1927, we see American workers again demand that US troops be removed from Nicaragua, from Mexico, from China, as well as solidarity for the anarchists Osako and Vanzetti who are being on trial for their political beliefs and not for a crime that they supposedly committed. And then in 1936, as May Day is developing, there starts to be this trend that May Day is actually a holiday of immigrants and not actual American workers. And so moving forward, May Day is now being characterized by the American government as a holiday of workers and not a holiday of immigrants and not a holiday of American workers. And so we can see people really start to address this in multiple ways. But I jumped ahead of myself. In 1936, San Francisco, for example, has a celebration of 50 years of May Day, and they call for a farming labor party, freeing all labor prisoners, jobs for the jobless, and then free Thalmann from Nazi hoodlums. Thalmann was a labor organizer in Germany who was imprisoned for organizing strikes against the Nazis. And as I mentioned, May Day is not being seen as an American holiday, but rather an immigrant holiday. In San Francisco, leaflets are being passed out, telling people not to go on strike, but actually staying in the workplace to fight Hitler, because Hitler's fascism is seen as a greater threat to American workers than anything before. And then in 1947, after World War II, Taft-Hartley is passed. And this basically says, if anyone's familiar with Taft-Hartley, or not familiar, this law is the reason why the labor movement is so weak today. Basically, workers are no longer allowed to engage in solidarity strikes. General strikes are basically declared illegal. Workers have to announce when they're going on strike. The president has the ability to cancel a strike. And there's just other things. It's basically, if you just look into it, it's just basically dystopian. And so what workers do though is we ignore Taft-Hartley and we still use May Day to denounce the Korean War, and immediately the U.S. government responds by banning May Day in certain cities, and saying that if you are using May Day is a communist plot to overthrow the government. And fast forward to 2006, which is when we had the biggest May Day, one of the biggest May Days in San Jose. It was called A Day Without the Immigrant. Over 250,000 people protested, and it was a direct response to House Bill 4437. In this bill, it basically said anyone who is affiliated with a immigrant or an undocumented immigrant and aiding them, that is considered a felony. So basically, it was attacking almost every section of the population for aiding undocumented workers. And as a result of this, San Jose turned up and over 250,000 people protested because San Jose is the majority, like 30% of our population is Chicano or Hispanic, Mexican. And this is a hugely important and cool thing to know, is that it shows that American workers are still consciously fighting back against the bullshit legislative policies of the American government. And I believe as a result of the Day Without Workers or Immigrants, I think the bill went away. Okay. So,
Mike,
yeah.
Gabriel has a question.
What's your question, Gabriel?
He asks, do you recall the names of the bill?
The name, my bad. Was it the Sensenbrenner bill or
I
my?
think so. I just know it as HR 4437.
Oh, okay. All right. Trying to clear. Just curious.
Yeah. I'm sure I can find it after this lecture and let you know, okay?
Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and so May Day Depressant. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to revive the spirit of the 2008 protest, or 2006 protest, by really encouraging workers to fight for our rights. And one thing to note is that, again, the American government and media tried to frame the 2006 protest as an immigration protest rather than as workers fighting for our rights. One of the reasons why they do this is they're trying to create that outside agitator narrative, making it like, oh yeah, it's not American workers. They're totally fine with the way things are. It's only the immigrants and the outsiders that are upset with this. So basically, we just need to make sure that they're not involved. So that's essentially what's going on when the media is portraying May Day as an immigration protest. It's a way to kind of gaslight us into thinking that we're okay with what's happening. So why does this matter? Well, May Day matters is because it's the direct result of American working class power. It is the culmination of our experiences as a working class dating back to 1791. And it's us overcoming the racism, sexism, and even like queer phobia that we're seeing today, and becoming the ultimate expression of worker power. It is a day where we don't just demand our economic rights, but our political rights as workers. It is also a day where we act in solidarity with our workers around the globe, fighting together for a more just world. And so with this, I encourage people to show up to May Day in San Jose at 4 p.m. at Roosevelt Park. and join us. Like last year, we had like 600 people, and we're trying to get even more. Okay. Yeah. So this is the thing. We'll be starting at 4 p.m. and then we're gonna marching all the way down to Plaza de Cesar Chavez. And it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be very militant. So yeah. So here's some discussion questions for folks. Just one, what are your overall thoughts on this? What are some of your key takeaways? How did this presentation challenge or confirm some of your beliefs about American history and May Day? And how can we use this information to build up May Days in the future? And what are our tasks ahead of us? So I'll give people like maybe a minute or two to think about it because I'm gonna go get some water. Yeah. So what did folks think?
Just as a reminder, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand in Zoom, or you can just raise your hand in the chat. Kat has a question. She says, I'm curious about the strategy of the 2006 May Day organizers. She's wondering how such a huge movement was successfully built even before social media.
Yeah. Would someone like to take a stab at that? For me, I think personally it has to do with one, how much it was advertised, and two, the fact that this bill was attacking basically everyone. Um, and it wasn't just image, like basically even if you were employing someone who was considered undocumented, you would receive a felony charge. So I think there's that very real interest. Oh, hey, this is kind of fucked up, kind of thing. But again, I don't know. I wasn't part of it, so someone who's around from that time could give more insight. That'd be way better.
I wasn't a part of it either. I was a
Mhm.
spectator, but I feel like the built up frustration
Mhm.
from having Pete Wilson as governor,
Mhm.
like I think in the community just like built up, and 2006 was a opportunity for like the entire like community of San Jose that felt like they were getting attacked, like
Mhm.
got out to the street.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
was long overdue. I
Mhm.
think like I couldn't tell you though like, the actual shit.
I just remember in high school being like, wait, where'd everyone go? And then I learned what happened like 10 years later.
Yeah, I remember in high school, like it was just like, yeah, everybody's going. That's what I would hear. And like,
Mhm.
I went to Independence,
Ah,
but it was like there was no if ands about it. You're gonna go. Everybody's gonna be there.
yeah.
Like we're under attack.
Hmm.
Like people really feeling that attack.
Hmm. And it was there because like George Bush was a piece of shit president. He was openly anti hostile to native to immigrant labor, so like it was a very credible threat. Yeah. And then Anand says, when you were talking about Bacon's Rebellion, it was an interesting example of how opportunist actors like Bacon, with reactionary intentions, killing natives, can end up serving a historically progressive role, at least in the example of uniting the working class along racial lines. Yeah. Hmm. Good. That's a great comment on it. Any other things? I guess what are other comments or things people have from this? Mhm.
Did say this earlier in the chat, but in
Mhm.
high school, we were always taught that from administration to administration, like US policy would be this or that. In
Mhm.
particular for World War I, we were taught Woodrow Wilson was an isolationist and just didn't want to participate.
Mhm.
But it's it's nice to know
Mhm.
and nice to now know that the American working class had agency in the situation and was a driving force in that isolationist policy.
Yeah. Like for me, I like to think about how like the anti-war protests of World War One dwarfed the anti-war protests of Vietnam because a lot of the stuff that was happening from World War One was made illegal. And it can really show like just how much it was popping off because almost immediately a lot of the leaders were arrested, like Eugene Debs, for example. Whereas in the Vietnam War, I don't really know of any laws that were making it illegal to denounce the war or to go against the policies of the US government. But at least with the World War One, we see like the sedition acts being passed, free speech clauses now having like conditions to it, because just how much workers were just shutting shit down. Yeah. Did this challenge anyone's views on American history? Did it confirm it?
I don't want to follow up on Kat's
Hmm.
initial first question.
Hmm.
Do you think it was so successful? The 2006 march was so successful because it attacked everyone so comprehensively, even including across class lines. You did mention like employers.
I think that's a part of it because the reality, at least from my perspective, people are self-interested, which isn't bad. It's just learning how to use that to our own advantage. And so, but the fact that everyone is being attacked, regardless of class or immigration status, was a key component, I think, to why 2006 was so big. Um, and why we see it slowly drift down in size afterwards. So yeah, and then Kat, would you like to say your comment?
Oh, sure. I
Mhm.
I tend to type. Um, yeah, I think it's interesting that that quote about how every conversation about the labor movements and what the workers were fighting for could not be talked about without also talking about slavery,
Mhm.
because it's the same narratives that are happening today on social media
Mhm.
about how no one's free until we're all free, and how that it's just parallel
Mhm.
hundreds of years later.
Yeah, exactly. Now do you see why I was so adamant about making sure slavery was included?
Right, right.
Mhm. But even further too, like we can see the same thing with prison labor. Like prison labor is now like replacing the role slave labor had. And so unions back then were saying, "Oh, hey, we need to abolish prison labor because it's affecting our ability to work." Um, Slave labor, prison labor was like today, it was working for cents an hour. And unions were like, oh, hey, like if they're literally just capturing people and throwing them in prison and making them work for like 2 cents an hour, we can't raise our wages because then they'll just close down our factories or our workplaces and just make prisoners do it, which is what is happening right now with Victoria's Secret, you know?
I think this can be seen today, but there's like an added dimension to it.
Mhm.
Because like right now, like you said, there's prison labor, there's also migrant labor, there's also
Mhm.
contract labor as well. Um,
Mhm.
all of those have like generally poorer conditions compared to like full-time labor.
Mhm.
Um, but then there's also the added dimension of offshore labor as well, where in that regard, it's harder for us to struggle for workers on the other side of the planet, but we have to trust the workers on that side
Mhm.
to know what their conditions are and how to agitate around that.
Yeah. So, yeah. uh, are there anyone who hasn't spoken like to offer something? Is there? Okay. Well, if there isn't anyone else, thank y'all for coming. And again, thank you, the Communist Party of San Jose, for giving me the opportunity to ramble on about something I was going to do anyway. So, hopefully I'll see y'all on the streets and come out.
Yay. Thank you, Mike.
No problem. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Very good. I have tons of questions later.
You can send them to me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Mike.